All right, I am going to call to order this meeting of Oberlin College's Theater Roundtable. This is the final edition, the final chapter in a year of really wonderful discussions that we have brought to the Oberlin theater community and beyond. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce our special guests. Before I do that, I want to just take a moment to do a few things, one of which is to acknowledge that we gather here, for those of us on Oberlin's campus, on land that was stewarded by Indigenous peoples, including the traditional territory of the Erie and the Haudenosaunee Confederacies and signers of the 1805 Treaty of Fort Industry. In the Seneca language, Ohio is good flowing stream, and we honor those who have stewarded Northeast Ohio's waters and lands across the generations. This calls us to commit to continuing to learn how to be better stewards of the resources that sustain us as well, and we commit to action beyond this token observation. So I want to tell you also, for those of you who might be joining our theater roundtable for the very first time, a really brief history about this relatively new innovation here in our theater, our Oberlin Theater programming. The Theater Roundtable was created by the department approximately a year ago, and we first started holding meetings of the roundtable in September of this year. We did this so that we could have a way of reaching out to the greater community, and also to make sure that current students, alumni, staff, and faculty here at Oberlin had a place to gather to discuss and to learn about new and important initiatives that are happening in the theater. And so we've been very privileged this year to welcome so many wonderful people, many Oberlin alumni, many practitioners, important practitioners in American theater. And it's just been a real joy and a wonderful learning tool. And so I do want to introduce our wonderful guests for today. And they are the artistic director of Dobama Theater, Nathan Mata, who was actually one of the original drafters of one of the documents that we'll be discussing, well, both of the documents that we'll be discussing today, obviously. We also have Colin Anderson, who is director of production. I think I had that. Is that right, Colin? Did I get your title correct? Cool. At Dobama Theater, and who has been an outspoken advocate in the greater Cleveland theater community for concerns that face the LGBTQIA+ community. We have the wonderful Nina Domingue Glover, who is not only a treasure here in Cleveland, a wonderful actress, writer, director, the list goes on, but was also one of the original drafters of the Clean House document, which is one of the chief points of conversation today. We're delighted to welcome Nina. And we also have the wonderful Nicole Sumlin, who is a wonderful actor, singer, theater artist, amazing human being. And Nicole was questioning why she was invited. And so I just want to say a couple of things about that, Nicole. For me, in many ways, some of the experiences that I know that you had lived through and that I saw you struggling with inspired me to get more involved with the Theater Artists for Social Change in Cleveland, and also become involved in helping to draft the original Clean House document. So welcome all. We're also so happy to welcome you here, and so delighted to have you all here. And I'm going to ask you each to introduce yourselves here in just a moment. So Um, in fact, without further ado, um, please, Nathan, would you just introduce yourself and tell us anything that you want us to know and what you're excited about um, in this conversation today?
Well, hi, everyone. I guess, first of all, I'm just always excited about the people. These are treasured friends and colleagues that, we get to do this work together, both, artistically and then obviously the work of social justice, et cetera. I mean, about me, I guess I grew up in the greater New York City area and keep moving more towards the Midwest for undergrad and graduate, and now for life in Cleveland. But I've grown to love Cleveland as home, and really just enjoy working within the theater community to make sure that the themes and the issues and the empathy that and our understanding that we try to grow through our art making is reflected in how we practice and create that art. And I think a lot of the people on the panel today, as well as many people in the room and in the community, have been working to those ends. And so in a collaborative, inclusive, inviting, welcoming, spirit of belonging way, we're trying to do that work. And I think that's what Clean House was and is, in terms of just trying to heighten awareness, and then for Dobama specifically, our response, our living document to how we're going to be better moving forward.
Thank you. Hi, Nicole Sumlin, would you introduce yourself, please?
I would love to. My name is Nicole Sumlin. I'm a Cleveland transplant. My husband grew up here. My husband, Eugene, lifelong Clevelander outside of college and some work as an actor. But I've lived here for, the past 16 years or so. And so it really has become home. And I'm so honored to be a part of the artistic community as an actor and collaborator with many folks that are here on the call. It's been really wonderful to actually help lead an organization in social justice. I'm the education director now at Cleveland Public Theater, and I'm very honored to serve there. That team is committed to moving that organization forward to becoming an anti-racist organization and making sure spaces are safe for all. And I have a dog named Thaddeus, and you might hear him over there. I have two kids, Easton and August. They are a part of Cleveland's artistic community too. And I'm really honored that you asked me to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Nina, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi. I am also a transplant. I am a Nolens girl, born and raised, but also by way of Cleveland. My mother's family is from Cleveland, so I have Cleveland roots too. And Cleveland has been home for 22 years now. I'm married. We have 5 wonderful children who have been virtual schooling during the quarantine. What an adventure. And they range from kindergarten to college. So when I say adventure, it has truly been one. But all is well. Can't complain. Cleveland has been a place that has nurtured me artistically and supported me, and it is my honor and pleasure to help make sure that spaces are brave and safe and inclusive and equitable.
Thank you so much. And I see, Colin, have you rejoined us yet? He's having to restart his computer. He was coming to us from his brand new attic, so he's trying to figure out where he gets his best reception, I'm assuming. So we'll have Colin drop in and introduce himself when he returns to us. So let me get things started a little bit and just talk about how the idea for this panel discussion came up. I was very privileged to participate in the smallest way in drafting the Clean House document. And for those of you who don't have any idea what that is, I'll explain it. What's really interesting to me about this group of people and the extraordinary work that they've done is that even before this moment where all of theater across America took a pause, an enforced pause because of COVID. And even as that was happening, as the growing awareness, the slow dawning awareness through the works of the Movement for Black Lives, especially in reaction to the gross injustices and death of George Floyd happened. This community, the Cleveland theater community, was already beginning to understand that in order to be responsible artists and to be responsible stewards of theater with a capital T, that certain changes needed to be made and also institutionalized in a way, and that we needed to address many of the challenges that were facing theaters, and particularly people from traditionally excluded communities, people of color, Black people, people of all color, the LGBTQIA plus community, women. A lot of this started with the Me Too movement, and then also a kind of the Me Too movement really started a kind of national questioning of policies and traditions that had sort of become institutionalized within what we do. And so a number of theater communities, including Chicago, began to really question this and began to look at ways to address some of the systemic problems that we were facing. And a number of people in Cleveland were, I think, really inspired by the original Chicago document that came out. And I know that there was a lot of interest in creating a similar kind of thing here in Cleveland. And so what happened, and I just also want to acknowledge, because they're not on the panel, but they were huge in making it happen. Tony Sias, who is the artistic director of Karamu House, who was one of the original drafters, and Eric Coble, who's a local playwright here in Cleveland, who I know did a lot of the writing of the original document as well. So it was really, really so fascinating to me that when this very, very important moment of realization came, just really, it must have been back in May or June, when theater artists of color across the country drafted this amazing document called "We See You, White American Theater." And I read it and absorbed a lot of what it had to say, and was inspired to explore my own questions and my own hidden biases, about the work that I'd been doing for 35 years or more. I was so thrilled to know that I was within a theater community that had already begun the discussion. Maybe not in as direct a way as We See You, White American Theater document would have liked or preferred, but that the work had been started. I felt so privileged to be a part of that, and to have had the experiences that began to, help me with my own awareness. And so I really wanted to have a moment to talk about this original document that's called the Clean House document. And I'm just going to read very quickly the mission statement, and then I want to open it up to our panelists. And I have certain questions that I want each of you to answer. So let me just read this. So the Clean House standards are a voluntary tool for self-governance that nurture communication, safety, respect, and accountability at all levels of theatrical production. Its mission is to create spaces free of harassment, including but not limited to harassment based on sex, race, sexual orientation, gender expression, religion, class, ethnicity, color, nationality, political belief, or ability. Nurturing environments that allow us to challenge ourselves, our audiences, and our communities, that support creative risks of mind and body, and that establish the freedom to create theater that represents the full range of human experience. A common understanding of practices for theater environments, including written, reproducible standards available at no cost, and by peer support through collaboration and community outreach using theater artists for social change as a resource. So that's the mission statement of the Clean House document. Yeah, and hello, I just lost everybody. Hold on. There you all are. And so that's the mission of the Clean House document. The Clean House document, and there's Colin. Colin's back for this. The Clean House document was written over a period and went through many iterations and drafts, and has been adopted. This is a question that I have because it's not clear to me, because unfortunately in the sort of the middle of its rollout, even as it was happening, COVID befell us, and so it's had sorts of stops and starts along the way. And so I want to talk a little bit about how it came into being and about everybody's role in it. And I'm going to refer once again, I'm going to go back to Nicole Sumlin, because even though I don't know what your active engagement in the creation of the document was, or if there was one, Nicole, you were never at a meeting that I attended, but that doesn't mean that you weren't deeply engaged in it. But I do want to acknowledge that some of your experiences, as I said earlier, were what led me to it. And I wonder, within your level of comfortability, of course, if you want to talk a little bit about what it was like to be a performer, a Black performer, a Black woman performer in Cleveland, and some of the instances that led you to the work that we're talking about today.
Sure. I was actually able to read a draft of the Clean House document, and just to provide some feedback along with some other artists and theater makers in the community with suggestions on how to move it forward. Yeah, I think one of the events that reminds me of how necessary a document like this is actually didn't happen in a rehearsal space. It happened in an Actors Equity meeting, one of our quarterly regional meetings. And there was just, wow, there was an actor that was very offensive. There was a very highly infuriating, insensitive episode of racial harassment that happened, where I was mistaken for another Black actress, which wasn't the infuriating part. But instead of just chalking it as a loss and moving on once it was addressed, there was a rationalization to the entire circle of folks about why I and the other Black actress could look so similar. And there was physical contact, and it just reminded me of an auction block setting, mm-hmm. where two Black women are compared, and it was mortifying. And I'm not a quiet person. I do a pretty good job, especially over the past handful of years, of speaking up and speaking out. But in that moment, I was stunned silent, and no one came to defend. No one spoke up. And it was really jarring that we had not created a space where that kind of behavior would be called in and called out, and that the victim would be protected. So I actually spoke with Nathan, and he provided support and some guidance, because Actors Equity did not have a means of resolution for a situation like this, because it did not happen in a rehearsal setting, which I thought was preposterous, with an organization that was designed to protect actors. Right. So going through that process to see what avenues I could take, it showed that the only track I had was a prosecutory track, where I would be pressing charges and there would be hearings, and that wasn't the way I wanted to go. I didn't want this actor to suffer, but I did want this actor to know how highly inappropriate that was. And I also wanted everybody around that circle to know that what they saw and what they heard was inappropriate, and it is up to us as a community to prevent actions like that from being acceptable. We need to create a space where that kind of behavior is not tolerated. People won't even breach something like that, because there is this culture of respect that we have created as an artistic community. So I was really thankful for the Clean House document, because it helped get into our brains what was acceptable and what wasn't acceptable. And hopefully what's acceptable in a rehearsal room where people feel safe and welcomed and included and celebrated would ripple out to these other spaces in our artistic community as well.
Thank you. And you succeeded. Thank you. Actually, I think, Nina, I would like for you to talk a little, because you were a huge driving force in the creation of this document. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about its history and how it came into being.
Sure. Theater Artists for Social Change was a convening, is that a good word, Nathan? Convening of independent artists across Cleveland and really Northeast Ohio, a way for us to meet, to discuss, things that might be happening within the community, and do it in a way that we were not coming as representatives as the theaters that we may work with or for, because that's always a tenuous kind of situation. Like, where can we discuss, hey, I had this experience and these things happened, but out of those meetings, several things happened. There was a performance that was created in partnership with the Institute for Social Justice at Case, because artists are like, we want to respond to things creatively. So that was one thing that happened. But another thing that happened, we had all of this data about, here are experiences that people are having in our institutions. And really, almost concurrently, the fallout that was happening in Chicago was, hitting the news, because really, like, Me Too happened, and the Time's Up document was released, and then the Chicago theater standards were released. Like those things were kind of all slightly overlapping, and then the big story, here are all the things that are happening in Chicago theater that people have known about, that people have not really known how to fight, because some of them, like what Nicole experienced, were happening not in the rehearsal space. Some of them were, which was more horrifying. But it's like, here are all of these things, and there was this culture of silence that had happened. And I don't remember the exact steps because it's been a couple of years now, but eventually Nathan and Eric Koval and myself wound up in a room um, and um, and using the Chicago theater standards kind of as a foundation and a jumping off point. It's like, well, here is this document. Here are the things, there, a lot of this can be applied to theater anywhere. But we have this data about specific things that have been happening in Cleveland. And we also have data about things that happen there that have not happened here, and perhaps we can put some preventative things in place. And one of the things that was really important to me about our document, because it wasn't as specifically addressed in the Chicago Theater Standards, was the racial portion. And also matters concerning child performers and youth performers. Because a lot of times stuff happens with kids just because theaters are not used to having kids. It's like they may have a show that has one child, but like, as an example, Dabama did Baker Street Irregulars, and it was like, what, 10 kids or something, and then they had to figure out like really quickly, like, oh, wait, maybe we shouldn't have the kids and the adults in the dressing room at the same time. Let's put a thing in place. And it's like, oh, we have that experience now. We can put recommendations for this in the document so that if another theater that normally doesn't have child performers suddenly has 10 children running around their campus, they have like, oh, because there's things sometimes you make mistakes simply because it's an experience you have never encountered. And having a parent artist in the room, which is also a highly underrepresented demographic in the creation of a lot of these kinds of things, and also an educator, who is used to working with kids, and it's like, well, hey, this is what we do, when we have them. So that happened, and we spent much time, and there were many drafts. And I felt very grateful to be in the room, and I was one of the things that really stood out to me is that if I said, okay, this is the thing we need to think about, everyone accepted it. And that was the culture of the creation of the document. Like anything that any of us were like, oh, wait, we haven't thought of this. Is this something we need to address? Who do we know that may be a resource that can help us make sure we're addressing this properly also, because it's 3 people in this room and we each represent, different intersections ourselves, but we don't represent everyone. And so there were a couple of meetings that was like, we're inviting this particular group of people because you represent intersections that were not in the drafting. What are we missing? Please tell us. What are things that we have misstated? What are things that could be stated better? And so on and so forth. Yeah, and it's a 40-page document, so it's pretty nuanced is the word I'm looking for. But it's also a living document. It's a living document, and I think that's important because as we learn and grow and shift, the document should do the same, as it's a guide. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was so helpful. For some reason, I don't seem to have a link to the document. If somebody on the panel has a link to the document and wants to drop it in chat, that would be fantastic so that people can see it for themselves. Because it is so thorough, it's quite remarkable. In the way it breaks down literally step by step what we, the co-signees of it, consider to be acceptable behavior in the whole creation of theatrical production. And so it's really quite remarkable. And so I invite you to take a look at it. Nathan, would you like to add anything to the discussion about that particular document?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just quickly, I want to make sure I double down on acknowledging, Karamu House, because Task grew out of a partnership that we already had, work that had to do with training, had to do with shared resources, and a lot of that dovetailed, having partnerships and networking and artists meeting artists and community meeting community was a really important step. And as that trust building happened, the next step is the convening that Nina mentioned. And we had, I think I had an email list of something like 70 people that that we identified kind of as a group that I sent out an invitation to, people that worked at all different sorts of theaters, mostly independent artists, but people that had connections to every place in the region, were invited. And over the course of, I think, a year and a half, at least half of those people, showed up for a discussion. And then when those events that Nina and Nicole spoke about happened, there was an impetus that we need to do something. We wrote to the Chicago Theater Standard creators, the Not in Our House folks, and they gave us permission to adapt their document and gave us some kind of insight. And then we've kind of continued it on. People have reached out to us and said, hey, can we have your Clean House standards? We'd love to see and compare and adapt. And that's happened in Minneapolis, actually, in response to the George Floyd uprising in response there, as well as on the West Coast and in Canada, we've heard from some folks. But yeah, it was just a lot of conversations, even before the drafts, about what needed to be in it, and responding to the Chicago Theater Standards. Eventually, I think when we got to the 5th version, it was then presented to the theater leaders. And for the first time since I've been in Cleveland, all the theater leaders got together in a room twice to discuss the document. Those conversations, I think, were productive, and it was decided that it would be beta tested for a year. And of course, 3/4 of the way through the beta testing year, COVID shut us down. But I do think something that's interesting is that, everybody came to that document from a different place. The size of organizations and theaters, the capacities were different. And yet, the true reason behind the Clean House standards was awareness and protection. Like, if something happens, how do I tell somebody so that I'm protected, or it doesn't, get worse, or that somebody knows, and awareness for everybody of like, what should be happening. Not that everybody can hire an intimacy choreographer, and not that everybody has, these resources, but at least we can talk about how this is being handled instead of, the traditional way of like, throwing people into unsafe situations. So that was kind of the purpose behind it. Ironically, I think, there was a lot of discussion, as you can imagine, and a lot of, pushback and responses about different portions of it. And then when We See You White American Theater came out, it was like, they took it, to such a important level that all of a sudden, like, Clean House Standards was like, oh, this was just meat and potatoes. You know what I mean? This is a bar that like shouldn't even really been discussed on many levels. It should have been easily cleared, because, the We See You White American Theater brought up much more fundamental organizational, how resources and fundamentally shook how theater had just been assumed that it was going to be made for the past 100 years in America. So so I think essentially that's I think that those are the basics that I would add to how we came to what we ended up with.
Awesome, thank you. Colin, I am not leaving you out, but your turn is coming, because you have a whole contribution to make to this discussion. But please do correct me if I'm wrong. Were you, in fact, here's a question for you. Were you involved in the original drafting of Clean House, or was that before your time?
So it was right in the middle of like me figuring out what the hell I was doing and who I was. I graduated from school and I was working for Borderlight at the time, actually, the Borderlight Festival. And they sent me to one of the Clean House meetings at Karamu, just to kind of to figure out what was going on and give input and feedback and blah, blah, blah. And so that was prior to assisting on Hand to God at Obama. So I hadn't met Nathan or Nina or Eric, but I was there. So I didn't have a hand in that creation necessarily, but obviously I've been around and kind of said, what about this? Or is this out? Or how does this get covered? So that's the extent of my involvement with Clean House specifically.
Okay, great. And so, and just because you were restarting your computer when we went around and introduced ourselves, would you just please tell people a little bit more about about who you are? That would be awesome.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, sorry, I've literally never had a problem with Zoom on this computer, and then all of a sudden it decided today's the day. Yeah, so my name is Colin Anderson. I grew up here in the Cleveland area on the west side, it's North Ridgeville, which is like between Oberlin and Cleveland, kind of. And then went to Oberlin College, graduated, and did a lot of restaurant work, and then found my way into Dobama as an intern, and then a part-time person, and now full-time, initially as the general manager, and then shifting now to director of production. I'm a singer, performer, director. I've done a soon-to-be intimacy choreographer as well. And so, I'm sort of getting into the freelance work now that I have a handle on my job at Dobama. I also am the co-founding executive artistic director, the shortest title, of Night Bloom Theater Company, which is a new theater project that I'm starting with a good friend, Casey Venema, at the new Studio West Gayborhood space. That's focusing on women and LGBTQ plus people and all the important intersections with those identities. And that's me.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Okay, so we know that the document got drafted and it was being rolled out, and then we all know what happened. And as I've already alluded to, it wasn't just COVID. It was that we seem to be, finally, God, please let it be true, awakening to a real awareness about exactly how systemic racism works in our culture. And really, yes, systemic racism, but really the white patriarchy, the white straight patriarchy, and how we've all been held in thrall by it for such a long time. And then, of course, as we've also already stated, the We See You White American Theater document came out, which really shook the foundation of theater across America. I mean, it's such a profound and it's just a clarion bell, fueled by understandable rage, but also just so beautifully wrought, that anyone who's read that document can't help but be profoundly affected by it, I think. And so all of that is happening at the same time, and then theater shuts down. So we are now in this place where and it's almost like a gift. It's like a gift from God that we have this moment to really pause and really think about what we're doing, and really think about who we want to be from this point forward. And so one of the reasons that I was particularly interested in inviting Nathan, and I know, Nathan, you have to leave at 5:45 sharp, so I'm going to get you out of here. One of the reasons that I really wanted to invite Nathan and Colin, because they are both serve on the artistic staff, obviously, of Dobama Theater, is because Dobama kind of took the Clean House document and has now expanded upon it, and has created this really remarkable document that I just really hope everybody in Cleveland embraces, and that we start seeing more and more of this kind of thing. And I know that, Nina, you were also instrumental in creating this document as well. The Love and Respect document. I would love it if, Nathan, if you could talk us through what that was, how it came into being, and obviously we will let Colin talk about that as well, and Nina too, please. So Nathan, would you lead us off there?
Yeah, I mean, one thing, and I have about till 6, so I got a little more time if we need it. I would I would point out, number one, that, you know, the murders of Black people at the hands of police and uprisings that resulted had been happening obviously for years, and there had been well publicized and big discussions. I think about the summer of 2016 in particular. You know, as Dabam was prepping to do an Octoroon that fall, that summer was just horrific and yet poignant and a lot of action. And yet it's so easy for American society and for American theater to go back to business as usual. And the thing that was remarkable about the dovetailing of this summer's events and a presidential election and COVID was that no one could go on, could say, well, I'm too busy, I have to go do this next production or this next season. There was no excuse anymore. Everyone had to face it and sit in it and talk about it. And I will say that the We See You White American Theater document was a gift to the American theater. And particularly, I think, for everybody that has been working, including everybody on this panel, and I imagine most people in this room, that have been working in these efforts, is that all of a sudden, there was this highly publicized response that was not just for artists and theater makers, but for producers and for grant organizations and for audiences and donors. And, you know, all of a sudden this, there was this tidal wave of support, you know what I mean, that in other circumstances had seen its progress stopped by the patriarchy, you know, by business as usual, by we don't have the money, we don't have the time, we can't do this now. And so that was a real gift. And so whereas the Clean House standards were about awareness and protections, the Love and Respect document is about belonging and inclusion and anti-racism, clearly, and the intersectionality of anti-racism with all other communities that have been oppressed in the American theater and by and large American society. But it's not enough for someone to be hurt and then be like, oh, well, here's Clean House, here's how you can report it. You know what I mean? Like, that's not the goal. The goal is for everyone to feel comfortable and welcome and supported in how the art is made and the art that's reflected on stage and how they're compensated and all of those things. And so that's where Love and Respect came. And I just want to say that it was a circular approach to how it was created. We brought in ALJP Consulting, which is an arts equity consulting firm out of Chicago, but with two at one time Cleveland-based artists, Al Hartley and Jocelyn Prince, who founded it. Leandro Zanetti was our consultant, who was our facilitator and a full participant. And you know, our task force was 2 board members. Colin and I were the staff members. And Nina was like instrumental representing the community as someone who not only has a long history in social justice and activism, but is an actor and a director and an educator and a parent and a Black woman and a transplant, you know, like her life experience brought so much to those conversations. And so, yeah, so that was a weekly meeting, September through January process that resulted in this document that is about holding ourselves accountable. It's about, you know, kind of saying to the community, this is where we're at right now, and this is where we're taking our solidarity statement and the anti-racism work we've done to this point and kind of taking it to the next level in terms of representation and action. And that this is a living document, so we are going to revisit this with different people year after year so we can continue to grow with it. Yeah, and I'll stop there and let other people comment on it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So Nina, would you talk to us about your experience in helping to draft that document and the ways in which it differs from Clean House? I mean, Nathan's already explained some of that, but I would love to hear your perspective on it.
Yes. So I would say the main difference is Clean House is for the Cleveland theater community at large, right? And it is, it has all sorts of things. It's like, here are simple contracts. Here is a process of reporting. Here are suggestions, all those kind of things. Whereas love and respect is very specifically a statement of, core values that DBAMA is following and putting out into the community. And I think my experience working with that team, being able to come in as an independent artist, right? And say things, the buzzwords are speak truth to power, right? But to be able to say things that are uncomfortable, that are challenging, that are like, yo, white people be doing this and it's wrong and it sucks and y'all need to fix that, and to say that and have, have it be heard, and to be able to say it, to people that you consider friends, and not have it, like validated away, or, well, this is what I meant when that happened. Like, this is the thing. I am telling you, this is my experience as a Black woman in theater, period, not just in Cleveland. It is systemic. It is institutional. It has happened since my childhood and before I was a child. This is what happens. This is what I know. I have notes from the field, from Black practitioners all over the country who are my friends, who are elders, from people who have passed. Y'all been doing this. Can we cut it out? What are ways that we can cut it out? And have that just be heard, but then have some actionable steps take place. Because I've had this conversation for as long as I've been in Cleveland. I had this conversation in New Orleans. I had this conversation when I worked in West Virginia. I had this conversation when I was in Chicago. So it's like, people love to meet and talk. Meeting and talking it's great. You have to start with communication, but also I'm at the point now, I'm tired of talking. I'm tired of saying the same thing. Like, I've been saying it for 20 years in Cleveland. And everybody says, you're such a treasure and all these things. And I believe they mean it, I believe they mean it. It's like, but if I'm a treasure, then what I need you to do is not treat me so precious. I'm not a treasure. I'm a human being. And even that, like, what does the Combahee River Collective say? The pedestalization is an othering. Don't put me on a pedestal. I am a human being. I want you to treat me like a human being, with dignity and with love and respect. That's it. You don't have to treat me like a queen. You don't have. Can you treat me like a human being who has basic needs, wants, and desires? That's actually the goal. And one of the things that was so amazing for me, because she is one of my personal faves, is that we used Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown as a guide. And if you have not read Emergent Strategy or Pleasure Activism, please do that. I'll put it in the chat. Just because it's a very different way of thinking about how to be in community with people. Because one of the things I have found in the Cleveland community, Cleveland is so good at speaking the language of community. We have the logos, but do we have the ethos? Like, can we actually play it out? And very often, especially when we start to talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion work, people have the language down. And because we have the language down, especially when speaking to communities that we have termed marginalized, but are actually the global majority, you speak community, but you don't mean the same thing I mean when I say community. And that has also been damaging. So even, the picking the title and the way we say things, like, I don't say BIPOC. This is probably the first time I've ever said BIPOC out loud. I don't say that. I say global majority. because that's what we are, right? The global majority. And I don't say white supremacy. I say white supremacist delusion, right? Because even to call it white supremacy is to say that it's a thing. It's not a thing. It's a white supremacist delusion, and it hurts white people just as much as it hurts everyone else, right? I did a talk for Young Cleveland, the Carl Jung Society, a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about, they use Jung's process of analyzing fairy tale and folk tale in psychology, et cetera, et cetera. And they're like, well, we want to bring, stories from other experiences. And so we did that. And then they were asking me all kinds of questions. It was great. And then we got to the sticking point where I knew we would get, I chose the story on purpose, right? and the response I thought I would get was the one that I got. And I said, well, I think the question is, if you have a methodology that is coming from a Eurocentric point of view, and you're trying to filter a story from a different ethnic group through that Eurocentric point of view, are you even interpreting the symbols correctly? Right? Because in this symbology, a snake is evil, but in this one, a snake is medicine. So, like, you have to decolonize everything at every step, including the language, right? And so titling the document Love and Respect and saying, like, this is actually a core value, this is where we're starting from, automatically puts me in a place of humanity. And that is always my main concern. That's my concern with Black art. That's my concern with being a practitioner, period. I am not trying to present perfection. That's not my job. My job is to present humanity and to honor humanity. So how do we bring that into the actual institutional policy, at a place? How do we help weave that through our language, our practices, and when I say practices, our hiring practices, the way we greet people, the way we create accessibility, for all the members of our community, like all of those things. And so being able to say those things bravely, because it's always a little tricky. It's like, okay, I'm gonna say this. Will I still have a job? Will y'all still hire me after I tell you all the things? Because I'm going to tell you, because I'm not quiet either, like Nicole, because I'm going to say the thing. Like, you asked me to say the things, I'm going to say them. And I'm not interested in being nice either. I will be kind, but there's a difference. It's not my job to make you comfortable or take care of your feelings. Like, your feelings are your responsibility. And one of the things that often happens when we talk about racial equity is that there is this misunderstanding. Like, I find that many people are more concerned with being called racist than they are with understanding whether or not their practices are racist and harmful. Like, baby, I don't care about your feelings. Be hurt. Good. You should be hurt. It's awful. And maybe if you're hurt, you will think about it in a different way, because you're talking about hurt feelings and I'm talking about lost life. Yeah. I have a husband and 3 sons and 2 daughters who, those are my heartbeats that walk outside of this house. I'm talking about, will they be alive to come home? I'm not talking about whether or not your feelings hurt because you think I called you racist because I said the word racist, right? And so being able to be in a room with a largely white group and say those things and have them hear that first and get that out of the way so that we can then say, okay, so here are how these things show up. And it's institutional, right? It's not that you are trying to do a thing to me. These systems are so ingrained in our society that patriarchy does not need men to do its work. Racism does not need white folk to do its work, because if the system is working, it's going to work with or without the people who started it, right? And so it's like, where can we find those places that we need to deconstruct this system completely? And I felt heard in the room. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking so somebody else can.
That was, thank you. Colin, would you please talk about because the language, I think the language of Clean House was pretty good. I think the language of love and respect is somehow more expansive, and particularly in addressing issues facing the queer community, the LGBTQIA community. And I wonder if you would talk, because I know that you that you were spearheading a kind of movement in Cleveland to get a companion document to, this is probably not the best way to say it, but you'll be able to correct me, a companion document to We See You White American Theater that addressed some of the issues that those of us in the queer community have lived through. So could you talk about that a little bit, please?
Absolutely. I think one thing that I would love to add to what Nathan and Nina just said is it's not really adding, it's more I don't know what the word is. My brain doesn't work after 5 p.m. But Nina has always said this thing that I really admire about maintaining your softness, about keeping the value in your softness, your gentility, your the love. I mean, truly, like acting with love doesn't run contrary to anything that we're doing or any sense of like professionalism. And so a big part of creating this document and a big part of emergent strategy is about vocalizing those things and keeping them as the important parts, resisting the patriarchal notion of like ripping out the soul of a thing to make it more efficient or more functional, and realizing that actually when something keeps its soul, it's running at full power because it's it can give and receive love more freely. I would say as far as the queer and trans and intersex and asexual etc effort went, basically growing up on the west side of Cleveland, there was quite a bit of homophobia that I experienced, from physical assaults to language to sexual assaults to all sorts of things. And coming to Oberlin, there was a certain sense of like, okay, now I'm going to be around people who are like me for the first time. Like I'm going to have this space to kind of process all of this with other folks. But largely, those folks come from like the Bay Area and New York, where being queer and trans is still not erasing how difficult it is, but it's different. The mentality is different. The amount of people is different. And so that space to process wasn't really there for me at Oberlin. And I think going into the theater field, there was a lot of like, oh, the theater is full of queer folks, it's full of trans folks, it's safe, it's fine. And I agree that it's full of queer and trans folks, but maybe not here in Cleveland. And I found that out once I entered the Cleveland theater field, where I mean, 1 out of every 10 theater artists that I know is queer or trans, if that. And I think, and especially when it comes to like artistic director and managing director and sort of like the theatrical staff, they don't know how to protect queer and trans folks because they are not among the ranks. And so there is a certain like tend to yourself, take care of yourself mentality. So I, noticing all of that and knowing I am a cis white man, queer or not, and lower class or not, like that's, I have a lot of privilege that comes from that. And so I was like, I can't speak to this on my own. I need to know how other folks are feeling, how this intersects with other identities that create more present physical danger. To Nina's point about being part of the global majority, you are instantly at a heightened risk of like violence by the state and by the things that are supposed to protect you. And so I conducted this series of interviews. It was well over like 100 hours. I think I interviewed 35 or 40 people. And I just sat down with them and said, what have your experiences been? Just tell me flat out, what have they been? Do you feel like heard in the room? Do you feel like you can walk into a room and be queer and feel safe in doing that? Do you feel like people are respectful of that? Do you think, how do you feel about straight and cisgender actors playing queer and trans roles? What is, just sort of exploring this question, because it doesn't really get asked. Because I think a lot of the time, theaters assume we have historically been safe spaces for queer people, and to a much lesser extent trans people, but they don't think there's any work to do. And I would argue that there's quite a lot of work to do in being more inclusive and equitable for people like me. And so essentially, it's not to harp too much, but I compiled a whole big document of all of the responses and really specific experiences. And it all sort of boiled down to the same notion, where anti-trans, anti-queer harassment and exclusion in theater spaces has been primarily rooted in misogyny across the board. Because queer men are treated with misogyny because of their proximity to femininity. Unless, you have the whole brand of like really ripped, like very low voiced gay. It's like, okay, just, you need to sit this one out. Thank you. And then like, cisgender lesbian folks have certain expectations placed upon them as women in society that they will not adhere to, because they should not. And they shouldn't. No women should be put expectations on them because they're one. And then you have trans folks, obviously, that have both sides of that issue, and non-binary people as well, where there's, discomfort in the inability to categorize people and put them into boxes and titles. But the most important thing in coming back around to the Love and Respect document was that all of the folks of color that I interviewed said that when they walk into a room, there was specifically a Black non-binary person that I interviewed who said, "I'm Black first and I'm queer second," which is really plain language for, like, again, there's a stack of urgency. There is a hierarchy of what is the most present physical danger, who is the most at risk, and how do we protect them. So when it came to crafting Love and Respect, and we were talking about leading with anti-racism, I think there's and I'm guilty of it as well. I had to stop myself several times from what about, because there is a certain sense of like, if one thing is getting attention, this other thing is not. But that's not true, because if you're talking about either one of those groups, just as an example, you are talking about the other, because they coexist, they intersect. You can't separate them out. And so a lot of the work that we did in the Love and Respect document was based surrounding LGBTQIA plus folks, was surrounding the interview answers that I received, and specifically how people felt they couldn't go, they were never safe talking to children, because people would assume and place a certain level of like, let's put it in plain language. They would assume that they were abusers of children, in one way or another. And so education programs, there have been people who were scared away from working in education specifically because they had been harassed and their employers did not come to their protection. I think that, that was also said to me about just working in the office, working in development, answering the phones. Queer and trans folks would be harassed and talked down to and talked over. And then instead of the employer saying, "Excuse me, this is unacceptable," to talk to our employee like that, they would be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, like I'll just take over," and then just absolutely, powder the behind of the person who is just stepping all over the person on the phone. And so, yeah, so rather than trying to make a companion document and recognizing that the Love and Respect document is lofty goals that have actionable steps toward achieving those goals, as opposed to a checklist of action items, period, to just be accomplished, it is easy to work in the answers that I got from those interviews toward these other goals about protecting everyone, without running in any way contrary to the anti-racism focus of the document. So that's a very long roundabout way of answering your question, I think, but hopefully it got to the core of it at some point in that diatribe.
It absolutely did. And now I am joining you via David Buer's computer. Speaking of queer, here it's my husband, because my computer totally just froze up. So I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. But I had to run downstairs so that I could jump on here. So thank you. No, Colin, that was fantastic, actually. So there are so many questions. I just want to ask one question. I would like for all four of our panelists to weigh in on it. I think that there's reason for hope here in this community, as demonstrated so beautifully by everyone who's spoken today. I am so inspired and filled with gratitude and love and respect for all four of you, and for the work that you're doing. And even if that work is simply, making noise, that's everything, honestly, it seems like to me. So anyway, I think there's reason to hope. And I would like to just hear how all of each of you is feeling about where we are and where we're headed, and what's good and what's not yet. Like, where are you in terms of your thinking about that? Ms. Sumlin, would you like to answer that question?
Sure. I'm very hopeful. I'm actually seeing changes. I'm seeing changes that are tangible. I'm seeing changes that require white power to sit down, to make space for others and to give power away. I am sitting in spaces where folks are being held accountable for their actions and are doing the work to make personal change, which when connected to an organization helps make organizational change. I'm hearing different conversations happening between artists. I'm hearing more artists be brave and say the uncomfortable thing. Sometimes it's just one of us. I've been that person. And now there are more. And that's the point. We need to galvanize and unify so that these questions become standard, that accountability becomes standard, and that respect becomes standard. One thing that was really cool about the Clean House standards, focusing on race in the way that it did, it helped open up conversations where race played other factors, like who is leading the artistic shape of a production that tells the story of a Black person or a Black people. Why are those people white? Why are they white? Why aren't they Black? Why can't they connect to the story, to the people, that story that's being told about? I started asking questions as an actor, which is dangerous, as Nina has said before, it's dangerous. But when you get to a point where you're just tired of being tired, then you'll take the risk because you value yourself and you value your culture and you value your heritage and the legacy that you're leaving behind. I would start asking questions when I was cast in stories that centered Black people. Who on your artistic staff for this production looks like me? And if you don't have someone that looks like me, are you willing to hire someone that looks like me? And that was the first round of questioning. And then the next round was, do you have a Black person leading this production? Because so many times we are tokenized. We're put in spaces so that boxes can be checked, so that you can be heard, but you don't really listen. So you can say that you did the thing, but the perpetuation of white supremacy delusion continues. And, you know, I started asking, no, Black people need to be at the helm of crafting Black stories. And I'm starting to see, there were spaces that were already doing that. And then there were spaces that realized, hey, we're not doing that, or we're doing it in a way that doesn't really give the power of leadership where it belongs. So we need to make some changes. And that's exciting. The thing that's frustrating, and that does need to change, is once these statements are put out, I was saying during the summer last year that there were different rounds. It's like, okay, now we're watching to see who's going to make the statement about what's happening. Okay, they made the statement. And so next, who's going to make changes in their leadership and their staffing? Because it's so white. Like all of these staffs look so white, and all the leaders are so white. So when are we going to start seeing those changes? Okay, we're starting to see those changes. What internal changes are being made in terms of policy and practice? That's the part that I really feel is the sticking point, because what's interesting is when pressed, white supremacy still comes out in these places. When you are pinched for dollars, when you are pinched for connection and network, and who's on your board and what donors and all the things you want to retain, like when they go against the core values that you may have recently adopted or you have revised, what will you do? And I'm still seeing so much work needing to be done in that area. Because when it comes to the bottom line, people want to make sure they retain their money, which is all about power, which is rooted in, you know, all the things that we're discussing that need to be dismantled. So that's the thing. And also, how are you speaking to people of color, Black people, Indigenous? How are you speaking to us in meetings? How are you speaking to us in rehearsals? I just feel like, you know, when you look at the characteristics of white supremacy, there's a document that is amazing, because you think that white supremacy looks a certain way, but it's actually so rooted in our culture that we mistake it for professionalism. We mistake it for, and we label it as corporate culture. No, it's not. It's rooted in evil practices. So when we hoard power, when we hoard information, when we have this sense of urgency that doesn't see people as whole people, you are perpetuating the problem. And that's where so many folks are still just holding a death grip onto those practices, because they just feel like they don't know what to do without it. And so we need to be brave enough to dismantle what we've been comfortable with, so that we can see real change.
All right. Phew. Man, I'm having trouble with, with my tech skills here all of a sudden. Thank you. Oh, Nicole, thank you so much for that. Nathan, what would you like to add?
I'm always full of hope and cynicism equally. It's been 400 plus years that we've been in these systems. One year is not going to topple them. I think Nikki alluded to the fact that there's stuff that is so ingrained, if we're even just in American theater, from the top-down structure to the board structures to, I mean, go right down the line. But those are like essentially management structure and the nonprofit board model, right? The traditional nonprofit board model are patriarchal and are part of the white supremacist delusion, right? So in and of itself, we're already starting from like a really difficult place. But But there's this thing that we talked about a little bit in during the Creation of Love and Respect document and in Obama staff meetings, that President Obama talked about when he received the Pulitzer Prize, which is like, whatever you do, it won't be enough, but try anyway. And that's where I'm at, is that love and respect. I mean, we could be 50 years down the line and they could build a statue to Obama Theater for saying you've done everything you could possibly do, and yet it'll be like a drop in the ocean in terms of like what really is needed to systematically change everything that's been in place for as long as it is. The thing that always gives me hope and also makes me it's like equal hope and equally like discouraging, is that when you read articles, when you sit in webinars, when you sit in EDI training sessions, all of which are important, there's this talk about communities, and there's talk about oppressed people, and there's talks, and those are important things. But when it comes down to it, when you leave that meeting, you're talking about people. You're talking about people. You're talking about individuals, like remarkable, your neighbors, your colleagues, your friends. And if your neighbors and your colleagues and your friends are not part of the communities that you're discussing, there's a really good place to start, because you have to build trust. That's something that it's come down to in all of this work that we've been talking about tonight, that we've been doing internally at Obama, in our partnership with Karamu, in Clean House, and Love and Respect. It all comes down to like, I will never walk in. I personally, Nathan Mata, with all the privilege that I walk around with, which is almost as much as one can walk around with in America, that I will never walk into a room and should never have the trust of the people in that room based on their life experience and what I'm walking in with. So it's my responsibility to like talk less, listen more, continually be as informed as I can be, and get to a place where there's trust. And I got to tell you, just to talk about my friends and colleagues on this call, and I've had very specific incidents that come to mind with Nina, with Nikki, with Colin, where I have felt closest to them in moments that should have, and in some cases did, make me very uncomfortable. Like places where Nikki goes like, this is bullshit. You know what I mean? Something that not necessarily, I don't think, Nikki, we've had something where I necessarily did, but possibly, but something where it's like, this is bullshit and you're part of the problem. And it's like, and being there for your friend and your colleague by taking that in. Nina, hopefully this is okay, Nina, like during Skeleton Crew, we were talking about, we were at a design run and we were at a certain point, and I was, talking about, well, these are the things that are really good, and here are some of my concerns. And she stopped me and she was like, the amount of time we've had to work on this and the resources here, that is privilege, Nathan. And it was like, boom, stop me in my tracks. You know what I mean? And like after that initial like second or two of like, bam, it's like, God, I felt so grateful that Nina could say that to me. And I told her so, like, thank you. Like, it is a privilege that you were able to say to my face, like, that's messed up, And again, like it's part of the American theatrical, I knew that she wasn't saying, yes, Nathan, you took these actions, but I'm not saying it's you, just to like, let all that go. Let's just let go. We're all racist. We're there. Like we live in a racist society. We watch the same TV, we listen to the same radio, like we were raised in the same traditions, we applied to the same colleges, like in the same school system. Like that has to just put that aside. And the sooner you can put that aside, the better. Sorry, I get worked up. But essentially that's what's about. And Colin too. I mean, Colin has said, for certain, Colin has said, this was not okay. And just like taking that beat and being like, you're right. And sometimes it's action and it's just like, Nina really put it well before when she said, it's not about hurt feelings. It's not about hurt feelings. Like we have enough trust and love and respect. You know what I mean? That I'm being respected and loved when someone says, Obama did this and it wasn't right. One of your colleagues did this inside or outside the theater and it's not right. And then like listening, empathizing, listening again, and then finding action that can be taken. And so that, you know, with both Clean House and Love and Respect, and in many other like smaller, less visible, less formal, documented ways, in an appropriate manner, like trying to dismantle these practices in our own backyard with our friends and our neighbors. And that truly, to me, that's what it comes down to. I got to tell you, one of the things that made me most upset was like when the events of the summer took place and We See You White American Theater came out, the number of white theater makers in the city that reached out to me saying, can you connect me with this institution, or can you connect me with this person? And I'm like, you have their email. You know what I mean? There's a website, like the white fragility or the nervousness or the fear of like, you know, needing to go through some intermediary or, you know what I mean? It was like, no, part of your work is that you need to reach out to them. You know what I mean? And so again, there's the hope that those people did reach out and did feel like spurred to need to do something. And also the cynicism of like, why are you reaching out to like a straight white guy to ask, you know what I mean? And so anyway, again, we don't have enough time for me to go on, but yeah, I am truly hopeful, but I also know that we, in our lifetime, we won't see, you know, a tenth of what really needs to happen.
Thank you. Colin?
I will try to clip my my thoughts down a little bit. I'll lead with the challenges that I think we're facing. One of them, which has sort of been alluded to, but I think the We See You White American Theater document really gets a good like needle in, is the structure of foundations and other like giving organizations as institutions of the state, and how they literally financially reinforce white supremacy, or not white supremacy, white supremacist delusion. I really like that, Nina. I'm going to start using that. In so far as they keep resources away from the folks who need it to actually have equity. And so there has been some movement that Nathan and I have seen. I mean, I do a lot of Obama's grant writing, and in conversations with some of these foundations, they're aware of that. They have said as much. Not all of them, but some of them have said like, we need to stop doing only project-based funding. We need to trust our organizations that if we give you $50,000, you're going to do what you need to do with that $50,000. We don't need to have direct oversight over the whole process, because I mean, even that term oversight like comes from overseer. It comes from like that alone is rooted in that exact thing. And so so on that front, I think we are seeing, I do have hope. I think there's a long way to go because of how much of each nonprofit theater's budget is made up of foundation giving. But I have seen some shifting toward, you know, the way that things ought to be. I think as far as, you know, LGBTQIA plus equity in Cleveland theater, I have hope. There needs to be a formal address of the fact that there's a problem. I think, like I said before, there is a certain mentality that we're in theater, or I know a bunch of gay people, or my parents are gay, or my brother is gay, or like, and so therefore, like, it's fine. It's like, you're just my pal, whatever. Let me just say a million things that are really offensive. I think that we need to go to the root and say, I know that there's a bunch of other work you need to do, and this is also work that you need to do. And rightfully so, there is a sense of ownership from folks in the global majority, Nina, if I could steal that again, who have created language, who have created structures for addressing the ways in which they are being oppressed by American capitalist, white supremacist, delusionary, et cetera, et cetera. that the LGBTQIA plus community, certainly the white LGBTQIA plus community, does not have, and does not have ownership of, or right to claim ownership of that language. And so being able to find a way to say, these are the problems and you need to fix them, and here is how we can lay this out the most effectively, is the challenge that, like, I, as the white gay man who compiled the information, like, it's really on people who are like me to move that to the next step, which is basically handing it to people like Nathan and saying, this is actually your work, not my work. And so, yeah, so I think that's a big challenge, especially given the fear that so many of the people I talked to were expressing, the fear of never working again, the fear of, like, it not being taken as seriously as some of these other issues that we're facing right now, because of the way that they've been told forever that they're supposed to be safe here. So I think that's going to be an uphill battle, but I do have hope that it could start to catch. But in general, and then I'll stop talking. In general, I think I really do have a lot of faith in a lot of the people that I work with. I mean, I certainly have faith in all the people that I work with at Obama, given this last year, the ways in which we've been able to, I don't even know, it's a whole new organization, which is wild, in a very good way. But across Cleveland, across different cities that I have colleagues in and friends in and everything, there's a lot more resolution or resolve, I suppose, to actually do this work and say, pardon the expression, but say fuck it to the money, say fuck it to like, no, that's not what matters right now. Like, yes, we need to exist in order to do the work, but like, we got to figure out other ways to do it if it means we're hurting people in the process. And I think that we're starting to see that really take hold. So that's the end of what I have to say.
And Nina, would you like to share your feelings?
Yes. I'm hopeful, very hopeful, because we, the storytellers, are having these conversations. And I think one of the main evils of enslavement in this country was the very targeted theft or attempted theft of Black imagination. Because if you cannot see yourself free, how can you get free? And I think that, you know, a lot of my personal politics is shaped by the Combahee River Collective, which is the river where Harriet, held people at gunpoint. It's like, you can come or I can shoot you. That's where we are. And one of the things that they say in the main statement is that every Black woman who came out of a strongly felt need for some level of possibility that did not previously exist. And we have to believe in the possibility, and we're the storytellers, and we have this notion, we all buy into this notion when we watch science fiction, that if you time travel and you do this one small thing in the past, it's going to change the entire timeline. So you can't do that, right? But then we don't also buy into the notion that if you do one small different thing in the present, it will change the entire timeline. And so that's where I am. You know, we got to do the small things to change the timeline.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's 6 o'clock. This has been such a privilege to be involved in, and I'm so sorry that there isn't time for questions. That's me. I'm a terrible. I'm not good at monitoring these things because I get so involved in listening. So forgive me for not allowing people to ask questions. And so if you need to run, I certainly understand and go. But if there are people who want to hang around, if you have any, I see Miss Caroline there. I know that she would like to say hello to everyone. So but please feel free to go if you need to.
I just really want to thank you all So thoughtful, so important. And Matthew, you definitely did design an incredible year that began and ended with our colleagues in Cleveland joining us to help us see where we need to be going as storytellers, as Nina says. And yes, I'm taking away a few of Nina's phrases with me for sure. So I'm one of the people that's going to have to pop off, but thank you, thank you, thank you. And I hope to see all of you soon.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you to all of our distinguished guests. And I don't want to keep anyone beyond their time. So it really, I am so deeply grateful to the four of you for joining us and for this extraordinary conversation. And let's not stop with conversation, please. Let's actually make some shit happen. And I really wanted to have this conversation because Oberlin, I mean, you know, we're an institution steeped in traditions, both good and bad, but you know, we are thought of as a kind of leader in the world of social justice. Yes. And you know, and I respect that, but also we have our own struggles. And let's not forget that it is a predominantly white institution. And I think that these conversations are ones that we really need to be having so that we can actually walk the walk and talk the talk. So thank you for joining us. And I think with that, we will let the meeting be done. So thank you.